Hey guys, back for some more QandA-anon, QandA-anon Part 2. Sorry, I have to be so in your face here. If I were me, I wouldn't want to see such a close-up of my face either, but so it goes. So the question I'm picking up with here, Justin Fisher asks, what is your musical guilty pleasure? You know what? I don't believe in guilty pleasures, aesthetically speaking. I think people who talk about guilty pleasures, and I'm not picking on you, Justin, I'm just saying the whole phrase, the whole notion of a guilty pleasure is rooted in snobbery, it seems to me. It's rooted in the idea that there are certain things that you're supposed to like, and there are certain things that you're supposed to look down on. And so, you know, if you're a classical music aficionado or a jazz aficionado or something like that, there's a certain type of music that you're that you pride yourself on liking because you think it is a higher form in some way. And then you find yourself liking a Justin Bieber song or a Britney Spears song or something like that, and you're like, ew, I'm not supposed to like that. I feel so guilty. That's a guilty pleasure. Or if you're a literary snob and you find yourself enjoying, I don't know, a John Grisham novel, and it's like, ooh, I don't want to admit that to anyone. I'd better not, that would totally ruin my cred if I were, if I let people know that I enjoy this. I couldn't possibly go on as a literary scholar. And I'm just against that way of thinking. I just think, if you like something, then you like it. There's nothing to feel guilty about. And there's plenty, to like in both supposedly high forms and low forms as well. In the classical realm, or what's thought of as the classical or the canon or whatever, and also in what's thought of as the pop culture realm. So the answer to your question is I do not have guilty pleasures because I don't believe in them. Let's see. Okay, so the next one from Gene Brass. Could you share your thoughts on the traditional Latin Mass versus the Novus Ordo Mass? I've talked about this before. I talked about where I stand vis-a-vis the traditional Latin Mass, the TLM, the Tridentine Mass, and the so-called Novus Ordo Mass, which is, generally speaking, when people talk about the Novus Ordo, they don't like it. They're saying that as a kind of a term of signifying their dislike of this particular mass. I don't know why the words Novus Ordo carry that connotation, but they seem to. The more objective way to talk about these two types of masses is the extraordinary form versus the ordinary form. The ordinary form is the so-called Novus Ordo. It was what came to be the Catholic Mass after Vatican II, where they began to say it in the language of whatever country was, whatever whatever was the predominant language in the country where the Mass is being celebrated. Whereas before that, it had always been said in Latin. And people who wanted the traditional Latin Mass, who wanted to continue worshiping in the traditional Latin Mass, were not treated very well. There's no doubt in my mind about that, and I think that's a bad thing. I think people who want to have the Latin Mass should be offered to them. They should be able to partake of the Latin Mass. My thing about and this is what I've talked about before. I'm kind of a moderate, I guess, on this whole debate, because there are people who are I think people who prefer the Tridentine Mass or the traditional Mass, Latin Mass, tend to be very gung-ho about it, which is not a bad thing. I think it's a beautiful service. It's very reverent. And the Novus Ordo often is not reverent. Now, I would say the Novus Ordo can be celebrated in a reverent way, and because I've been to plenty of masses where that has been the case. So I'm not anti the so-called Novus Ordo myself. I think it is a valid expression of the Mass, but I also think that the TLM, the Tridentine Mass, is also valid, and people who prefer it should be able to have access to it. But there can be a kind of again, returning to the question of snobbery, there can be this kind of attitude among aficionados of the traditional Mass that it is the only valid Mass, and that anybody who doesn't worship the Latin Mass is not a true Catholic. And like I said, I was at a SSPX parish a few weeks ago when I was out of town, when I was up in Wisconsin, and the priest in that case thundered against what he called quasi-traditionalists, who weren't just full-bore SSPX, or full-bore Latin Mass all the way, all the time, that they were, people like the FSSP, I think they're called, the I can't remember what that stands for right now, but it's a group that favors the Latin Mass, but that isn't quite as edgy, let's just say, as the SSPX. They're more within the mainstream of Catholicism, and this guy, this SSPX priest, attacked them as being pseudo traditionalists or quasi-traditionalists, and I think I don't care for that type of mentality. That everyone who doesn't go to the TLM is just might as well just be Protestant. Like that's it's funny that that's an insult, but like I said, I'm more of a moderate in the sense that I think that they're both valid, but I'm much more of a conservative in that I think people who favor the traditional Mass should be given access to it and should not be given the third degree about it. And I think it was a shame. It was just a tragedy and a travesty that for many years after Vatican II, the traditional Mass was just shoved under the carpet, and people who wanted it were just left high and dry, and there were all these terrible innovations that were really not reverent, all the kind of things that you see mocked, rightly mocked and derided by the traditionalist wing, like clown masses or really crappy, terrible, hippie music, substituting for the hymns and all that. So what insights do I have regarding the works of E. Michael Jones? I also talked about this before. I like E. Michael Jones, but I think he has an ID fixe, if that's how you say it, an ID fixe. It's one of those terms I've seen written more than I've heard spoken regarding a certain ethnicity, and I know that's why a lot of people like him. That's why a lot of people who aren't even Catholic like him, because he talks a lot about this particular ethnicity. But I don't think that ethnicity or any ethnicity is beyond being criticized. Let me make that clear. But I do think I think that Jones has a lot good to offer, and that his book Libido Dominandi is really good, and I would recommend it to anyone. But I don't always like his tone. Again, there is this kind of there can be a pomposity to it that I don't particularly care for. So those are my thoughts on E. Michael Jones in a nutshell. Dia Diaz asks, is it accurate to state the USA stands for usury, sodomy, and abortion are three highest values? That's definitely what those who run this place stand for. Those are things that they all believe in very, very strongly. But I mean, the heartland still exists, and conservative America still exists. Church-going America still exists, and so it's a more complicated question than that. Scott Terry asks, are you more Hotspur or Falstaff? I like that. I like the question. I've been Hotspur all my life, but the older and more cynical I get, I think I'm turning into Falstaff. I've always thought Falstaff was kind of overrated. I know people really, really like him because he's a big fat guy who who's really lazy, and that's his whole shtick, is just being this jolly fat man who just tries to get out of doing any work. Hotspur, Hotspur is underrated. I really like the character of Hotspur. And he's somebody who he's very convicted. He's very passionate, and I remember from reading King Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2, that Hotspur was my favorite character. So Hotspur would be my choice. And Diaz says, Andy, have you noticed a kind of faux intellectual affectation primarily on NPR? God, yes. In places whereby the speaker will stutter constantly and in general not be able to speak. Yes, I have heard that. In general, there is they do stammer a lot, but of course I get accused of speaking too slowly and not getting to the point. So I guess I'm not really one to talk. But there is this kind of, I don't really have anything against people who talk slowly or slower than they should. But affectation is annoying, and NPR, the NPR voice, I hate it. If I walk into a room and I hear someone, if I hear NPR on the radio, I immediately feel like hitting somebody in the face. That's the effect that the NPR voice, hello, welcome to NPR. That's the effect that voice has on me. I can't stand it. How do you think Biden's handlers are getting him to exit the stage? Good question. Casket Amendment 25, or he hangs out in the basement until his term ends and he doesn't run for re-election, or some other option. I guess we'll see what happens. At this point, I don't put anything past anybody. But yeah, sheesh. I don't know. I don't know how he has lasted this long. He just, and I don't pay attention to politics. I try to stay out of it as much as I can. So the times when I've been paying attention, I haven't, have been few and far between. But the times, like he gave some press conference in the last few days over the whole Afghanistan debacle, and he said something like, "Well, I've been told that to answer the questions of these particular people who are listed on this sheet." So, and he first went to some NBC reporter. So he actually said that. He actually said, "I've been told these are the people I need to talk to." Like, Joe, you're the president. You can talk to whoever you fucking want to. But apparently you can't. Apparently somebody else is running the show and telling you what to do. So, and yeah, the guy's just, wow. There's nothing going on back there. And it's pretty frightening. You have to laugh about it, because if you didn't laugh about it, it would just be frightening. But then again, it does help to draw attention to the fact that I think the executive has very little power, actually. He's more or less a figurehead, at least these days. So, even if he were, actually brain dead, they could probably just walk him out like Bernie on Weekend at Bernie's, and just make it appear like his mouth is moving. With deep fakes now, they could actually do that. Andy, do you think the NFL fixes their games? I've wondered about that before. I guess it's not outside the realm of possibility that they and any other professional sport could engage in chicanery like that. I know you want me to. You're always teasing me about the Falcons losing the Super Bowl, and I don't know if you're wanting to bait me into saying that was a case of a thrown game, or was it just a case of Tom Brady being really, really, really good? I'll believe the latter until I see a smoking gun about which would show me the former. But I'm open-minded. Paul Wright with his his 80s nostalgia questions. Do you like Level 42's Something About You music video? I don't remember it. Do you like Karen Carpenter and the Carpenters? No, I really don't. I don't like folky music. So it's not really my thing. Do you like the Cars Drive music video? No, it was pretty dull. I'm sorry to say. I thought it was. There wasn't that much to it, and the song, it's maybe my least favorite of all the Cars songs. It's just not. It doesn't really go anywhere. I tend to like the Cars music, but not that one. Will you examine the lyrics of Jackson Browne's Lawyers in Love? Yeah, that's a pretty cool song. Pretty labyrinthine lyrics there for that one. Not quite as labyrinthine as, say, American Pie, which, is a folky sounding song that I actually do like, just because it's sort of like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland if it were a folk song. It's got all of these allusions and references, and it's very opaque and kind of sinister sounding. It's very intriguing. Lawyers in Love, also not as well known, but different. Will you examine the lyrics of Crowded House's Don't Dream It's Over? Maybe. I'm less interested in that one than in Lawyers in Love. Okay. And finally, Orthodox Phronesis asks, I have a question in regards towards what I might deem as scientism versus revealed truth. The question is about death before the fall. This idea of Darwinian evolution, which seems to have very little basis at all. This, which I would deem a lie. Evolutionary theory is promoted. Thus, evolutionary theory is promoted, I think you mean, by all the authorities that promote the lies we see today. If you believe this Darwinian death before the fall, why? And why do you accept some scientific narratives they promote and not others? I don't know what you mean by death before the fall. Now, are you saying that Adam and Eve would have died if they hadn't fallen? I guess I don't know the context for all of this. Why do you accept some scientific narratives they promote and not others? I'm very dubious about Darwinianism generally. Although I haven't talked about it very much, but I think there are, the atheistic scientific elite talks about the fossil record and talks about this and that, and the other as though it really proves something that it doesn't prove at all. There's lots of problems with the whole evolutionary explanation of things. But at the same time, I really kind of try to stay out of this whole evolution versus creation thing, just because I think whether you believe the Earth was created 6,000 years ago in 7 days, just literally like the Bible says, or whether you think it evolved slowly over time for over millions of years, both of those accounts have to account for why there once wasn't matter and now there is matter, and there once wasn't life and now there is life. So ultimately, when you get down to it, neither one of them explains, the fact, if you favor one or the other, you still have to take into account why life exists and why matter exists. And I would say that's, that means making some kind of unmoved mover, some creator, the explanation for things. That's not an apologia for Christianity or the Christian notion of God, because this is much more impersonal than that. But it is something that it is a reason why I think, in a way, this whole evolution versus creationism thing is kind of a red herring. And that's why well, I won't go down that road before. I've talked before about the flat Earth stuff, and why I think that's also kind of a red herring. And how it's weird that it just came up in the last 7 or 8 years, and suddenly there's tons of people who are talking about flat Earth. Where, when I was growing up, there were lots of really conservative, believers in biblical inerrancy. I grew up in the South, so I mean, there were a ton of people who believed, who were young Earth creationists, who believed the Bible was inerrant, that the world was literally created in 7 days. But none of them felt the need to say, no, we're not the third planet from a sun, living on a ball orbiting. It's like this whole flat Earth thing, and mocking the whole Copernican model of things. That just suddenly sprung up all of a sudden, and it's weird that it sprung up all of a sudden, and it's suspicious to me that it sprung up all of a sudden. Which isn't to say that I paint flat earthers all as shills or anything like that. I want to make that clear too. All right, so that gets me to the end of your questions. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for subscribing, for giving me 501 subscribers. Not that I don't really believe that strongly in, building up your subscriber count, or chasing clout, as it were, through saying, hey, look at how many subscribers I have.